Okay, wonderful. Welcome, Scott. I'm so glad that you could be with me. I know it's not evening for you, it's evening where I am. Scott Morgan is joining us from Australia, and I've been looking forward to this discussion. We've been planning it out for quite some time, and Scott is a counselor. He is a Myers-Briggs consultant, and we're going to get into what that is and what Scott does and how he helps people. So welcome, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, Tegan. Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's so good to speak with you. I've been following your YouTube channel, as you know, for a number of years. Your channel about introverts and the INFJ specifically, and I'm a huge fan of your work. And thank you. I'm curious what made you. Well, first of all, I guess we could talk about what you do and how you got into the work that you do.
Sure, yeah. So I'm originally from New Zealand, live in Australia. I've lived here more than half of my life now. I have been for most of my adult life in the helping professions. I remember I was unemployed. Wow, when would early 2000s, somewhere in there, maybe even earlier than that. But someone just mentioned aged care, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. That something about that just sparked an interest, and I had a job the next day, and so there I was, finding myself helping the elderly in a hostel aged care facility. And then that led to disability support work, working with people with acquired brain injuries from accidents. And then that led to, where did that lead to? More aged care work. And then eventually someone said to me, asked me what I wanted to do with my life. And out of the blue, I just said, I think I'd make a good counselor. And I think that was in like 2002, 2003, somewhere there. And they looked at me and they said, I think you would as well. And I've been waiting for you to realize that before I say anything. So I saw that as a confirmation. I felt like a bit of a God thing for me, because I hadn't ever thought about being a counselor. So it was just like somehow the spirit spoke in that moment. And so that led to doing a degree in counseling. And I did that sort of from 2004 to 2008. So I've been practicing as a counselor since 2009, I think. But it wasn't until 2012 that I stumbled upon the INFJ and the Myers-Briggs side of things. And I originally, someone gave me the test and I did it. And he gave me a one-page blurb on the type, and I was like, oh, looks a bit interesting. And I just filed it away with all of my sort of personality, personal growth stuff that, you accumulate. And about 6 months later, I was like, I might revisit something. I'm going to revisit that. And so I read the page and I thought I might just jump on YouTube and see if anyone's talking about this stuff. And of course, a lot of people were, and I started watching videos, and I'm starting to resonate with it all. And I think maybe a year later, I thought I'm going to make videos about it. I think maybe I've got an angle or something I can contribute to the conversation. So that started in 2013. It started to grow and started making more, and noticed that the INFJ videos were doing quite well. And so that, you sort of just naturally go to where you're getting the interest, and that sort of, in a sense, making the videos sort of was part of my own personal growth and understanding myself, because I'd delve into a topic, I'd recognize it in myself, and then I'd speak to it. And it wasn't for probably, what year was it? 2016, where I thought maybe I could transfer my practice online. And because I was face to face for the first however long it was, getting the occasional online client, and then I thought I'm going to give this a go. And so when I met my now wife and we got married, I moved into the country because I was in the suburbs where she was, now we are, and so I just went from there to just making videos as much as I could for a couple of years. And then maybe 18 months later, I think, almost at the time, like a month before our son was born, all of a sudden I got all this new clientele coming through. Like I was getting new clients, but all of a sudden there was a flood. And all of a sudden I found myself with my wife and I found ourselves with a child and a more than overflowing counseling practice. So I was very, very busy. And it was just satisfying that we pulled it off, that we managed to make that transition to an online counseling business. And I guess just to finish, I just knew that I was going to be busy, with our new baby and so on. And so I took what I thought was going to be a month or two, and it turned out to be 3 years. And it doesn't feel like 3 years. It just feels like it feels like a couple of months actually. And there are a lot of reasons for the delay coming back, but one of them was just very busy, with clients and with a child. But I was thinking about it all the time. I was thinking I've got to get back to it and want to get back to it, and I should get back to it. But then it wasn't until late last year, I think, I was like, well, there's no ideal time to come back. And so I'm just going to make it happen, and just sort of push it a little bit, sort of push my circumstances around a little bit and sort of focus on that despite distractions. And so, I've been making videos for the last couple of months. And it's good to be back into it. Yeah, I feel a bit rusty, but I'm getting there.
Scott, I'm thrilled that you're back into it, because I think I'm speaking for a lot of people that we missed you for those few years. Your videos, I came across your videos. I really didn't know about Myers-Briggs myself until a few years ago, and I found out I was an INFJ and didn't really think too much about it. But after understanding narcissistic abuse, and then I was watching something about INFJs being especially prime targets for narcissists, and I don't know if there's actually evidence to that or not, but a lot of INFJ communities were saying the same type of thing, and I noticed that in a lot of the content that I was finding, a lot of the literature about INFJs that I was finding. So I guess we should start with what is an INFJ, first of all. What is the Myers-Briggs personality type indicators, and why is that useful?
Right. Well, I after discovering my own type and making videos, I thought it might be a good idea to become a certified practitioner for it. So I found out there was a class running in a different state to where I am, and I flew up and I did that course. And it's quite funny. I did a little bit of research on like where I was going to fly into, the bus I needed to take into town, and where I need to get to the venue. I didn't realize that the venue was only like a kilometer or so away, and I had my luggage, of course. And I'm like, that's not too far, but I didn't realize it was all uphill. in maybe the States, a bit like Florida. I'm assuming Florida is humid, and it was. So I turned up and I walked straight into like freezing cold air conditioning, and I was just perspirating with sweat when I arrived. It's like, extroverted sensing inferior just on display, like I didn't plan too well and turned up in a mess. And anyway, I did the course and got the certification. And well, I guess to move into your question, the Myers-Briggs, I think it's on the surface a very simple idea. It's just looking at the self from a cognitive functions perspective, and the theory of the 16 types, and how the four letters, the introvert extrovert dichotomy, and where you lie on that spectrum. It's amazing how many people I meet that say, I'm both, I'm an ambivert, I'm both, I'm 50-50, and the Myers-Briggs theory says, well, no, you're probably, even if it's just slightly one or the other. And the whole idea of the questionnaire is to force a answer to get a best fit type. So those four letters, do you want me to go into the four letters, or just, is that enough?
Sure, please. If you could, that would be great.
Sure. Well, I guess the introvert extrovert is the first one. The second is the sensor versus intuitive. The third is thinking versus feeling. And the fourth is judging and perceiving. And you do a questionnaire to find out which of those, where you lie on those four dichotomies. So for me, I fell in the INFJ of those four letters. And then you break those four letters down into cognitive functions, and you usually focus on your first four. So the leading function for the INFJ is introverted intuition, followed by extroverted feeling, followed by introverted thinking, followed by extroverted sensing. And what's really, like, it's interesting that there is so much controversy around the Myers-Briggs, because I guess there's a community that hate it, and there's a community that believe in it strongly. And it's just interesting that there's a dichotomy in that sense, because in my opinion, it's undeniable the truth that it contains. And like, if you have two people, you've got an ESTJ and an INFJ, and if you ask the typical INFJ questions to the ESTJ type personality and ask them if they identify with what you're saying, they will not identify with what you're saying, and vice versa. There is clear differences, and so I found the Myers-Briggs tool very, very helpful. So when I've discovered my own type, I think I was about 4 years into counseling as a counselor, and it was like rocket fuel to my approach. While I was being effective, I think in a way, I hadn't found myself and my style. I was still finding my style, and that was a big piece of my style. And so it enabled me to access a landscape and a terrain that made sense to me. And so instead of like speaking on the surface, kind of up here, if you like, just for want of a description, it enabled me to sort of sink down deeper into the narrative of what was happening. And I started to notice things that I just wasn't able to notice before. And I was able to engage with clients in ways that I wasn't able to before. And if we had like recorded a couple of sessions a year beforehand, and then half a dozen sessions the year after, just if like a fly on the wall type thing, they would have looked so dramatically different. And I just was really developing my craft at that point, having these incredible experiences of following my intuition, sensing something early on in the conversation, it being far off, but knowing that there was something important about it, and the client and I just discussing things, and us, I think, holding a space, knowing that there was a deeper truth to discover about what we had been talking about up here, and then that deeper narrative just sort of emerging. It was a very exciting time, at that whole process, feeling like miracles happening in the counseling room. But the Myers-Briggs, I'm just losing some of my train of thought here, but
that's okay.
Yeah, maybe I'll stop there. I've probably missed some of your question, but yeah.
No problem at all. That's really interesting. I didn't know that the Myers-Briggs was so controversial. That's news to me. That's interesting. I guess what I want to ask you then about the INFJ specifically, some themes that I've noticed come up. I guess if you look on the internet, there's people who say that we almost have this psychopathic type of dark side that you don't want to provoke. But why do you think that our personality type, first of all, is so rare, and second of all, such, as we were talking before recording, such a seeming magnet for personality disordered individuals? If we actually have this psychopathic dark side, I kind of don't understand then how a predator would want to sort of cross that. I haven't figured that out, and I really would like your thoughts on that, if you don't mind.
Well, I think, I don't know if I have answers, pure answers to that, more than like my current thinking as we're talking, because I think it's I think there's things that we do know about that, what you're describing, but I think it's also it's almost like conversations need to be continually had to discover more about it, because I think there's some uncharted waters in regards to understanding a lot of that. The reason for the rareness, I don't have an answer, actually. I don't know why that is. Do you have insight into that?
I really don't. And something I've noticed though about INFJs is that there's a lot of similarities, but there can be profound differences. I mean, you have everybody from, I think, like Nelson Mandela and Oprah to Adolf Hitler. I mean, it runs the gamut, which I find interesting. Yet, so you have this sort of powerful, larger than life type persona, yet it can be such a definitely, I personally experienced the magnetism from severely personality disordered individuals, and I couldn't figure out if there's almost something missing that I still can't figure it out, what the rarity, or that particular personality being such a seeming target, a good target.
So you're sort of talking initially though about the dark side of the INFJ, you know, like the monster within that could be unleashed if they crossed, that kind of thing. I think so one thought is that I guess we all humans have that capacity for letting loose when pushed a certain way. I think maybe the difference is how the INFJ would unleash if they were to. And I think there's also probably a correlation with if there's a certain level of damage in the INFJ that might lead them to be more vulnerable to that kind of outburst. But I don't think it's reserved for people with damage. I think it's reserved for a sanity re-regulation mechanism,
Well
where
said.
the world that's been put on the INFJ, whether it's relationally or in a workplace or something, is if it becomes too upside down, if there's too much junk going on, if there's too much whatever going on, that is in conflict with how the INFJ sees it. And if we just assume that the INFJ is seeing it rather correctly within a organization or a relationship where the other is not seeing things the right way up. So I guess I'm favoring the INFJ in this context, but that certainly can happen. Then I think there can be a threshold where eventually the INFJ will just launch into the mother of all truth bombs, where there's a reaction, but it's reaction usually with truth, as opposed to like someone might react calling someone all horrible names and it's just off the wall reaction. It's got, just character assassination stuff that's just designed to hurt, whereas I think the INFJ is usually just doubling or quadrupling down on the truth they're holding, but they're delivering it in a much more forceful, unfiltered manner. Which can, yeah. And it usually doesn't work. And it's interesting, I've written an article and I've made a video that kind of speaks to this topic, so that it's good timing in that sense. But usually it's unhelpful because the other person, because the INFJ is acting from a defensive, offensive position out of complete and total exhaustion and frustration, usually, it just promotes defensiveness from the other. And it also, there's that added twist of the fact that usually what the INFJ is saying is true. And so it's defensiveness with truth, which can be even more overwhelming for the receiver, meaning not much happens, but the INFJ is relieved of the tension that has been brewing, usually for some time.
Yeah.
The aspect of anything you wanted to say to that before the next part of that?
Not at all, Scott. I completely agree with that, and with the door slam as well, that it's not just arbitrary or overnight from our perspective.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the door slam, because I guess I try and look at the door slam from multiple different angles, because it can be seen as a virtue, and from one side of the room or whatever, and it can be seen as a terrible, hurtful and insensitive thing from other people's point of view. Mm-hmm. But I just think with the type, it seems to be, maybe it ties into what you're saying about sometimes the INFJ can attract almost like the opposite of what they need, what at least what they think they need in a relationship. And there's conflict or tension, or there's just the things that happen in relationship, and the inner world of the INFJ can get so exhausted and hurt and missed and all of those things that eventually the door slam feels like that's all that's left. And I've said in another video that I think the INFJ often thinks, no, they're ultimately, and in a delayed fashion, responding to the fact that the door has been slammed on them. That the INFJ is actually trying to invite a deeper connection. They're inviting a conversation and intimacy to be able, like, into me you see, this open, vulnerable, transparent relationship. That not all INFJs, of course, but that's certainly a big part of, I think, the INFJ temperament. And the other is usually either unwilling or unable to the level that is either required for the success of the relationship, or is unable just because of where they're at, just where they're at. And also there can be just downright abuse going on in the relationship. So a door slam is not I think if someone's referring to it or using it willy-nilly, then I don't think it's what I'm describing. I think it's more of a defense mechanism. It's maybe more used as a manipulation tool and things like that. But for the mostly, I think INFJs, it's like the last resort. And it's like, if I don't do this, and I don't think it's even conscious, but I think there's this moment where if I don't do this, I'm going to psychologically go downhill. I can't hold this space any longer. And the INFJ has this automatic thing that shuts on the inside that is almost, I would almost say, beyond the INFJ's control. I think it is a psychological unconscious tool that happens to safeguard their survival and their existence. And I don't think it has any level of satisfaction for the INFJ. I don't think there's any joy at all in it. I think it's a terribly painful place to be, and it's a terrible place to, it brings tremendous relief, but that relief is intermingled with heartbreak and hurt and exhaustion and confusion and pain and so on. What you were saying about being the INFJ attracting unsound minds.
Yes.
I think maybe a few thoughts, some initial thoughts on it are that the INFJ, for the most part, holds a space for everybody, and they're usually a pair of ears rather than a mouth, and they meet people with mouths that like to talk. And so there's just that reality of it. There's talkers and there's listeners, and so INFJs find themselves listening, and I think that's often a comfort zone. But and I think it also ties into family of origin. If there's neglect, if there's abuse for the INFJ, if they grew up with narcissistic parents. It's amazing how many INFJs I've met with who've had narcissistic parents. Is there a correlation, or is that just the world I'm in? But I think that also sets a child up for narcissistic relationships in adulthood as well, because their top two functions essentially are being manipulated and controlled to serve the abuser. And so they meet people unconsciously that fit that mapping, if you like. So it can certainly happen that way. I think, what's the other piece of that? Oh, yeah, there's more there, but I just can't grab it right now. Yeah.
I find that absolutely fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating. And do you know of any ideas? Because I'm not aware of any other than awareness and boundaries and being very firm with those types of folks. But is there any ideas that you have for healing maybe some of those things that we're not even aware of might be bringing in that type of person? Like how do we get past attracting that type of situation?
Yeah. I like to think of the narcissist, empath, or INFJ connection, if you like. I like to think of it, it has a silver lining. And one of the I'm pretty sure it's a theory out there, it's certainly one of mine, is that we ultimately, any human being ultimately is attracting into their world how do I say it? Like, we usually find the positive and the negative traits of our caregivers in somebody. That both the positive attracts us, but also the negative attracts us. Often the negative is unconscious. We don't see it initially, because unconsciously we want to heal from something in us, and they're going to trigger it. They're going to trigger my wound and vice versa. And that if we're able to recognize that, we can work on healing that. And a simple example is a spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever it is, just saying something or using a word that they mean what they mean about that word. But for us, that word could have been a major trigger in childhood. And they say that word, and all of a sudden, hurt, and I start to react, and these sorts of things. And the other persons might be looking like, I mean no harm by what I've just said. I just, like, like, I'm not saying it's even a bad word. It's just a word that's a trigger word. And they can hold a space if they're not triggered by the reaction, the person who said the word, for the person that is triggered to be able to recognize, yeah, they didn't mean it the way it's used to be meant in the past. I'm reacting to something back there because I know that they have goodwill towards me and they're not out to hurt me. So now we can hold a space together where I can come out of that triggered space. I can, breathe, and maybe I need to go and deal with something that word has triggered, to, as part of my own healing work. But where I was going with all of this is, I think, if we stay with the INFJ personality type, I think the INFJ can grow up in an environment where that narcissist influence ends up causing almost like a separation from within the INFJ themselves. And we could just use the sort of adult inner child analogy, where the INFJ ends up being cut off from who they are because it's too painful being who I am with this person. So I need to separate from that and morph myself to what is going to cause the least amount of pain for me, because I need to survive in this environment. And because if we grow up in that environment, that's quote unquote normal. It can feel normal. I think part of that is because usually narcissists act in such a way that they're convincing, and their manipulation is seamless. So it's often, they're very good at sort of shaping the environment in such a way that we mold ourselves to it, not realizing that we're molding ourselves to something negative. And so that ultimately, though, no matter what the circumstance, what can happen is the INFJ is then cut off from themselves, and they're operating from a defensive position within themselves, a protective position, not in the sense of reacting to everything, but just being half of who they are. And then they're vulnerable to predators. They're vulnerable to being manipulated and used, because they're sort of disconnected from their intuition, from their ability to see nonsense. Now, part of the problem is narcissists, and I've said this in another video somewhere, that the INFJ, even in that state, is able to recognize incongruence. They're able to recognize when something doesn't add up, when deception is happening, when someone's lying. These things can still be quite accessible. But the narcissist, because in a way they're being themselves in their manipulative state, there's no incongruence in them to pick up. They're being authentically manipulative. And so
Good point.
there's nothing to pick up, so we can walk right into that stuff. But then, and I think what that does is so let's say the INFJ is now disconnected from the child within. I think narcissists have a really good ability. I sometimes think the narcissist in a way is like the inverted INFJ. They're like the dark representation of the same thing. They can do the same thing as the INFJ. They just do it for sinister reasons and for self-centered reasons, as opposed to INFJ that's usually doing it altruistically. They're doing it for the good of the other, and so on. So the narcissist is able to actually see inside, because the INFJ is usually being authentic, so they're open, and so the narcissist is actually getting a read on the INFJ, recognizing the wound, maybe getting, and I sometimes think there's a spiritual component to it, because I think they can end up tapping in on things that are key to the INFJ that none of it's been, there's no word that's been spoken that allows them to know or to engage in a certain kind of way. But in any case, I think they're able to capture the inner child by pretending to mirror back what the inner child needs. Usually it's unmet attention, love, care, and the love bombing aspect of it gets the inner child's attention. Now the INFJ is hooked in to this abuse. And there's no abuse yet, even though there's no outward abuse, even though abuse is already occurring. And so there's a sense of a bond. It brings a euphoric experience in the INFJ. I've met them. This is it. This is the person that I've been waiting to meet my entire life, right? It's all a facade. And so they tap into their idealism as well. And that brings about a bond. And you could say it's already a trauma bond. And then the narcissist will start to devalue in some way. The narcissist will start to use that attachment that has occurred to manipulate, control, and cause all manner of problems. Gaslighting, you name it, they'll create a nightmare world, really, for the empath or the INFJ. Now, I think all of that happens because if that's all it is, it's like, why bother living if that's all it is? I think it's the silver lining is sometimes it's not like, it's difficult to say it because it's like, I know people have gone through all sorts of horrendous things, and to sort of say, well, you needed to go through that to get in touch with your inner child, and it just took what it needed to take to wake up. It's true, but I say that with an awful amount of sensitivity and gentleness, even though I didn't say it in a gentle way. Like, there's truth in that, in the sense of the amount of pain. The way I look at it is the amount of pain that the INFJ goes through is in essentially the amount of pain that they need to go through to break through the narcissistic abuse from their childhood to get back to who they are. And when they get to that place, then they can start to live their life. And usually that happens somewhere in and around probably the door slam of some description. But it's like narcissistic abuse ultimately can help the INFJ, it sounds weird to say it, helps the INFJ to break through the original abuse that they don't know they're carrying from their childhood to get back to who they are so that they can begin to live their lives fully, deal with the consequences of the narcissist, deal with that whole thing, gray rock, no contact, all of that sort of stuff, and they can begin to live a more full life. It's just an absolute tragedy that it sometimes requires that level of pain to get to that point. But that's where I think the silver lining is that is what can come out of that diabolical connection.
That was incredible. You said that. I can relate to what you said so much. That was so much of my own personal experience and other people that I talked to, that it was almost I talk to people who say that it had to get progressively worse, almost like they had to come face to face with a real sadistic psychopath before they were able to break through that. So I completely agree with that, Scott. That's so well said. And I know this is maybe a bigger subject than we have time for. I won't keep you too long tonight, but I've been dying to ask you this, because this is something very interesting to me about INFJs, and some of the people that I really respect and look up to and admire. I don't know if these people are INFJs, but I have suspicions that they probably are. Would you say that generally we tend to be, and perhaps this is a part of why we attract the narcissist as well, or maybe cults and things like that, is that we tend to be almost conspiratorial minded, or we like different, maybe that's not the right way to say it, but we like alternative explanations, and we can go into those areas. I know for myself, I'm interested in certain conspiracies. I respect people who are sort of into that, whether they're doctors who think outside the box or scientists. There's some that I can't follow along with, and I think that going too deeply into them might be rather toxic for myself. What do you think about that? Have you noticed that as well, that we sort of have kind of tendencies towards that?
I think the answer is definitely yes. I have to think about how to engage with this. It's a huge question.
I know. I kind of hit you with like a loaded question there, eh?
It's all right. That's okay. I like it. What I think I would say is maybe the INFJ's cognitive functions are, I think, are well designed to be inquisitive enough to look beyond the surface and the obvious. But that doesn't mean that all INFJs do that or can do that. It really depends on where they're at in their journey, in their growth, and so on. Maybe a sort of a simple example may be, not necessarily, maybe this is a clunky example, but like maybe the INFJ that is separated from themselves and they haven't made that connection may not be necessarily attuned to looking for truth in the bigger context. I don't know if that's true or not, but just a thought. Whereas maybe the INFJ that is in touch with their deeper self, they've gone through some pain usually, and there seems to be a correlation with personal growth, spiritual growth, and pain. I think there's the two are connected. That usually leads towards an ability to see beyond the obvious, not just have the capacity to look beyond the obvious. And I think it's fair to say that there are conspiracies that go on and that are going on. I like to use the example because there's, the cliche response from people when anyone's like looking into anything beyond a maybe more mainstream narrative, the first thing that they usually get back is, oh, look, I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist, you know.
Yeah. Of course.
But the example I use is just like if someone's working in a company and the management, quote unquote, conspire, which sounds like a negative term, but they really just get together and they restructure the place. They're like, we're going to add some new policies. We're going to start doing this. We're going to train our assistant managers and this and that. And the poor man or woman in the cubicle is like, this place sucks. What's happened? Well, I loved working here. Now this place is crap. What's happened? And they can't quite put their finger on it. They can see that things are different, but it's because decisions have been made further up that have filtered down and impacted them. They conspired together to change the culture of the place, and it's hurting people. Usually it tends to hurt people when these things happen. But that's an example, like to think that there aren't powerful people with means to manipulate and control aren't. So there's definitely conspiracies that go on and are going on. And I'm not adverse to rabbit holes. I like looking into things.
Me too.
I'm not afraid of it. I think there's some personality types and maybe some people that feel like they'll lose themselves if they explore things that maybe don't make sense yet, or that are different to what they've been taught and things like that. I don't seem to have that problem. I feel like I can explore all sorts of things and maintain a sense of self, and I'm okay. I'm fine. In fact, it's really, really interesting, some of it. Now, there are some things that are just really woo-woo, and it's like, okay, yeah, look, I don't, you know, I'll move on from that one. But it's quite a fascinating experience just looking into stuff.
I agree.
You know, what's wrong? Like where is the West particularly gone that looking into things is something to frown upon now, as opposed to like question things, be curious about things, look into things. It's like some for some reason that is frowned upon. It's like that you know, I don't like you as much now knowing that you want to look into things.
Yeah, I agree.
So and I think it enables me to hold, because particularly with clients have lots of different views and lots of different beliefs and perspectives and lifestyle choices and all of that don't necessarily match with mine. You know, that's none of my business, essentially. So I'm able to hold, from a counseling perspective, I'm able to hold a space for anybody, because I'm not threatened by other people's opinions, thoughts, and views and ideas. So I've found in any research that I've done that would be that kind of conspiracy path or rabbit hole type of stuff, I think it's just it's enabled me to live better in reality than not. Yeah, like I think I'm a pretty normal person.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said. That was that's fantastic. I completely agree with you. I really like how you said that. And yeah, I mean, there are some, like you said, kind of there's some wacky stuff that I haven't been interested in kind of going down, but some things it's really expanded my mind. And I like hearing people as well that I disagree with, to see kind of where that's coming from. And it's very expansive, which I like it, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. I'm going to give you a proper goodbye after we stop recording for sure. But to
Okay.
close, to kind of last question for you, if you don't mind, and if this is too big of a subject, that's okay. But I'm a little curious what, for the introverts, for us introverts, are there jobs that are kind of like, this is maybe where we should kind of be headed, and jobs that we're just really not suited for? Or is that kind of a myth?
There's probably, I think there's truth in it, but I tend to like there can be like a list of, you know, preferred jobs versus non-preferred jobs, but that doesn't interest me so much, because I find people come from lots of different backgrounds, and it might not fit that kind of idea. But yeah, I think some general principles there is, like, our Western culture is much more extrovertedly designed than an introvert requires. And so this open plan office versus cubicles or separate rooms for, you know, that alone can be a life-giving or a life-taking environment for an introvert. Introverts, yeah, I was thinking INFJs as well. Like, you know, there's that book by Susan Cain called it's called Quiet, I think. There's a longer title, but I think there's Quiet is in the title somewhere. And she talks about how 150 years ago, the world generally ran on a culture of character as opposed to a culture of personality, which we are now, a culture of personality. Ironically, I don't want to be in the culture of personality. I want to be in the culture of character. And when I read that chapter in her book, I was like, oh, I just sort of felt this, man, I want to live in that world. And I think it might have been the Industrial Revolution that led to this change, that, you know, we leave the farm and we go into the city to find work, and to do that you need to outbid, in a job sense, you know, all the other candidates. So then it's pushed people into selling themselves and having this or that sort of personality to gain employment and all of this sort of thing. So I think maybe just as a general response, like creating I think introverts would do better working for themselves in lots of ways. But I've got lots of thoughts, but none of them, maybe they're more nuanced responses, but to what you're asking. But I think it's ultimately, like, I worked in lots of places that weren't ideally suited to who I am, but they were certainly ideal to my circumstances at the time. I needed a job, I needed to work, this is where I was at. But I think the more an introvert or an INFJ is able to pursue who they are, because I think INFJs particularly are very countercultural people. They don't fit the culture. I don't fit the culture. I don't like it particularly. I've gotten out of it as much as I can for my own mental health, essentially, just my own. I don't need to be around 1,000 people a week to feel fine, you know. Yes. One's enough. So yeah, working for, where was I saying?
Working, self-employment. People. Yes.
Yeah. And so finding, because I think, see, it's funny because I didn't sort of design, I feel like God really designed where I am today. I like, especially around the the thing that's happened over the last couple of years, working from home, having an online business, all of that's been ideal with what's been going on in the world. But yeah, when an INFJ, I think, discovers who they are. So if I was to work with an INFJ who's looking for a career change, I'd be like, well, what have you done? What are your interests? What are your sort of side hobbies, even like things you do when you don't have to do anything else? If I'm not mentioning qualifications, these sorts of things to help create a bit of a broader picture of the person. And with that can come other ideas and like, it's like, we'll utilize this and this and move in that direction, so be more conscious about it. Because I think INFJs a lot can sort of just be pulled along by the inertia of life and just are not as engaged decision wise in a lot of where they end up. And so I think I'm confusing myself a little bit here, but just a combination of that, trusting in almost like the unconscious path that one is on, as well as trying to engage as much in that as possible, to be cooperating with that, to be led and to lead towards something better. It sounds a little woo-woo the way I've said it, but maybe that if we had more time, we could unpack that in a more solidified manner.
Absolutely, Scott. That's no, that makes perfect sense. I love how you describe these phenomena, because sometimes I can't put words to what it is that you just so beautifully did. So thank you so much for doing that. I'm so glad that we got to talk today, Scott. Like, this has been a fantastic experience. And speaking of your business and clients, are you still taking on new clients? Can people what's the best way for people to reach you if they want to get in touch with you?
Sure. Yeah, no, I am taking on new clients. Best way would be to either send me an email, which is scottericmorgan.com, contact@scottericmorgan.com, or the website, scottericmorgan.com. There's everything about me there, and people can make contact through the website.
Great.
That's probably the best way people can get in contact if they're interested in counseling.
Fantastic. And of course, I'll put a link to your awesome YouTube channel as well.
Sure.
Keep up the great work with that, Scott. I'm so glad that you're back, and thank you so much for everything that you're doing, because it's a difficult time right now for so many people. And the fact that you're out there doing some of the things that you're doing is so important.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Tegan.
Yeah, you're most welcome. And like I said, I'm going to give you a proper goodbye, but I think, we're going to close this off here. Just thank you so much for doing this with me, for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and the experience that you have. I can't thank you enough for your time to do this. Thank you.
No worries, Tegan. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely, Scott. Thank you. Well, bye-bye.